Hi, good evening, everybody. Let me go into my slideshow mode here. Nope. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another History in Our Backyard webinar. My name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the host of this evening, and I'm also the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society, a nonprofit organization dedicated to documenting oral histories of individuals who were involved with Cold War related activities in the Southeastern Pennsylvania area during the Cold War. One reminder, if everyone could kindly mute your microphones and turn off your cameras to preserve bandwidth for our presenter, I very much appreciate it. And again, this is our History in Our Backyard webinar series. And as some of you who have come to these programs in the past are aware, we traditionally had these as live programs about 5 or 6 times a year held in Warminster at the old Johnstown Centrifuge. But with the coronavirus pandemic, we had to make the decision to go virtual, which we've done since July of 2020 quite successfully. We are, however, hoping to begin doing some limited live programming. Fingers crossed, May 2022, so a couple months from now, we're hoping to have our first live program in just over 2 years. So stay tuned for more details on that. But we will continue to offer these monthly webinars as well, because they have worked out quite well for us. And we're always open to topics. And in fact, I already have 3 potential topics coming up for 2023 already. So we're always actively looking for new things to bring to our audience. Something else I wanted to mention, I mentioned this last month, actually something coming soon to the Johnstown Centrifuge, which, as many of you know who are local to the area, it is now a pretty successful events facility, but they are opening up a brewery and pub, and they are on the verge of actually having their grand opening. I think they're still having a few logistical issues with brewing their own beer, but they will have some limited hours beginning this weekend. Friday, unfortunately, they will not be open, but Saturday and Sunday, you can see at the bottom of the screen, they will have some limited hours, afternoon and evening hours. So if you're in the area, you should come check it out. I think it's going to be a lovely place, and I think one of the few microbreweries that will be in the Bucks County area. Just, have to put out the always the little I guess solicitation to everyone regarding donations. We are a 501c3 organization. We basically operate on a shoestring. Donations are always welcome if you so choose to donate to our organization. One easy way to do that is if you go onto Amazon, there is a mechanism to do that through smile.amazon.com, and a portion of your sales on Amazon will go to our organization. But we do have the ability to directly donate to our organization. If you go to our website, coldwarhistory.org, there is actually a donate button on the website to do so. And as you can see, some of the things listed here that we utilize the donations to help us fund. Also, just as a reminder, again, we are using a new email system where we do send out announcements for our programming. And if you are not receiving those and you previously were on our mailing list and are not receiving those emails, please check your junk mail folder and set your spam filter to allow our emails from our mailing address, mail@coldwarhistory.org. So thank you, and just a brief reminder on that. I also wanted to put a plug in, like I usually do, regarding our YouTube channel. We do add content there regularly. We do also place these recordings actually on that YouTube channel as well. If you don't if you happen to miss one of our monthly lectures, or you wanted to review one of the lectures again, but we do try to add other content there as well. So wanted to encourage you to check that out. We also have a Facebook page. If you are on social media, Generally, we try to also keep that page updated with our events and occasionally some other newsworthy articles related to the Cold War space race. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And here's a list of our upcoming 2022 lectures. And we will introduce our speaker for March in a moment, but you can see that we've filled out the whole rest of the year all the way up to December. So definitely hope to have you back in the ensuing months. Again, just as a reminder, May tentatively, we're looking at a live program back in Warminster with some docents coming in from the U.S. Air Force Museum from Dayton to give a very interesting presentation on new insights regarding the shoot down of Gary Powers's plane. I've seen a preview of this presentation. It's fascinating. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And then tentatively in the fall, we may have an open house again, like we used to do prior to the pandemic. But I'm kind of weighing whether we're going to actually have the open house versus just a straight lecture, but we have a little bit of time to plan for that. And then maybe something in the summer, but I haven't decided yet. So stay tuned for more information on that. And again, just as a reminder, please kindly mute your microphones and turn off your cameras for the presentation so that we don't have any extraneous noise to interfere with our speaker this evening. And the turning off the cameras helps to preserve bandwidth for the recording. So appreciate your help with that. Before I introduce Jim Rubillo this evening, I did actually forgot that I had this particular image in our digital collection from our archives. This is actually a Brewster Buffalo that was restored by former workers at the Naval Air Development Center. And so this is an image from the restoration. And my understanding is that that restoration was completed, I believe, when it was transferred to Pensacola, and it is on display, or was on display at the museum down in Pensacola, the Navy Museum. So if you happen to be down there visiting, you may want to see if it's on display. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker this evening, Jim Rubillo. Jim is a retired college dean, professor, and nonprofit CEO. He's been an inspirational leader, communicator, and advocate for mathematics education during his career, having made numerous contributions to the mathematics education community, with a special emphasis on technology and teaching mathematics at the community college and high school levels. He's a well-traveled speaker, having presented hundreds of talks and at least one in every state and Canadian province, interestingly enough. Jim has an intense interest in local southeastern Pennsylvania history, just as we do, and serves on the board of the Old York Road Historical Society. And one fun fact I wanted to share with everyone, as a child, he played in the ruins of the Hog Island shipyard, where the Philadelphia International Airport is now located. So if you have questions during the Q&A regarding that, I'm sure Jim could entertain us with that as well. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Jim for his talk this evening. So just give me one moment here. There we go. All right, the floor is yours.
I think we're set, right?
We are set.
Okay. Well, good evening. This story tonight is different than most of your programs. Most of your programs are about Johnsville and what happened there. I just know as a child, I had an intense interest in World War II. And as such, my interest, I knew of the Brewster Aircraft Corporation. I knew of the Brewster Buffalo and some of the other planes. When I moved up here from South Philadelphia, I noticed the Johnsville Naval Air Station, and I sort of figured, what in the world is that doing there, especially since there was another air base just a few miles away. Why in the world would the Navy have two places like that, and so on? So over the years, I started probing, and when I finally retired, I finally dug in. And this talk is about what I found. And what I found is something interesting. My title different than Eleanor's. Brewster Aeronautics at Johnsville, an outlier of the greatest generation. That means what happened here is not your typical World War II story. So I'm going to probe and try to let you, I'm a storyteller, not necessarily a historian. So this is the story, and most of what I found, I had to dig out of local newspapers and other things as it will pop up. So there's a lot going on here, and let me get in with the tale. First of all, I'd like to tell you something about the Brewster Company. It was actually founded way back in 1910 in New York City. And what they did from 1810 until the turn of the century was they made very high quality carriages. There's a picture of one of their carriers. Their factory was at 47th, 48th Street in Broadway. And that's a picture of it way back in that early times. Now, Brewster was very well known for high standards. And just give me a second here. I'm having a little trouble here at the bottom of my screen getting this one thing out of the way here. Okay. It was known for its high standards, and it was Tiffany and Company had in its advertisements in the 1800s that they were the Brewster of jewelers. So we're talking about a very high quality company. I'm sorry, something's going wrong here. Eleanor, are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you. If you touch with your mouse your slide and see if it'll advance from there.
No, I'm having trouble with the thing at the bottom. It's in the way here. I've never had this trouble before.
No, we can see it. Yeah, we can see your slides fine.
Yeah, but it's not moving.
Oh.
Let me just I'm going to stop the share and then come back in. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Okay, we can see you again. All right.
All right. Now, in the early 1900s, the company shifted to making automobile bodies. That's really something different. And one of their customers was Rolls-Royce. And checking in the musical theater, Cole Porter in the show Anything Goes wrote a song, and the song Anything Goes, one of the lyrics in the original version was, "You're the top, you're a Ritz hot toddy, you're the top, you're a Brewster Body." So you heard, I'm sure you heard when you were growing up of Bodies by Fisher. Well, Bodies by Brewster was a high quality property situation. But after World War I, aircraft started showing up. So Brewster created a division to produce automobile airplane parts. And based on Brewster's reputation alone, the Navy started giving them subcontracts to make floats and wing panels for Navy seaplanes. Now, those are the kind of planes that were available in the 1920s and 1930s to the military. Not very high quality aircraft, but that was in its infancy. And at that particular time, there was no such thing as an aeronautical engineer. People just started making aircraft. And then they started making their own companies. So as the Depression came along, this business slowed, Brewster's aircraft business. And so in 1932, a fellow by the name of James Work, a former project engineer at the Naval Aircraft Factory, purchased the operation from Brewster for $30,000. Now, have you ever heard of the Naval Aircraft Factory? Well, it seems to, up until World War II, the Navy made its own aircraft, and their factory was located at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. I'm sure some of you, when flying into that particular site, to Philadelphia International Airport, looking out the right-hand window as you're landing, you saw this aircraft hangar sitting there in the field near the Navy Yard. Well, that's where the aircraft factory was located. And James Work, having no training, never gone to engineering school, got a job as a project engineer there and started becoming interested in aircraft. And without a background, he purchased this division and opened Brewster Aeronautics. So between 1932 and 1946, I'm going to give you an overview of the saga of Brewster Aeronautics. In that period of time, it became a large company with sales exceeding $500 million and sales to the US Navy, to England, to Poland, Finland, Belgium, and the Netherlands. So they were selling all over the world. They developed a reputation for overcharging their clients, missing deadlines, paying extremely high commissions to its own sales force. They destroyed the company's, Brewster's, reputation through bad management, shoddy construction, late deliveries, and contentious labor relations. Then they became the subject of congressional investigations, and eventually the company was seized by the Navy. Now I'm going to take you through all of this. Now that's not the normal picture of America's greatest generation. So let's see what happened. There are some principal players in this. I'm just going to mention some names along the way. One is James Work, who was the president of Brewster and its lead engineer. Then there are the Miranda brothers and Felix Zelser. These were super salesmen. All three of them had past convictions for illegal arms sales, and they were recipients of very high finder's fees. So they were making lots of money in this particular case, and we'll go into that a little bit. Then there was a fellow by the name of Tom DiLorenzo. Well, at least that's the name he used here. He was also known as Harry Posner. He was the president of the United Auto Workers Union, and that particular union had control of the Brewster workforce. Then the name I know you've heard of in the past, Henry J. Kaiser, an industrialist who had established the Kaiser shipyards, which built those many, many Liberty ships during World War II. And he also formed Kaiser Aluminum, Kaiser Steel, and he founded the Kaiser Permanente health systems that's still in existence today to provide health care for his workers. And then there's Frederick Rubillo, who was a Kaiser appointee to run Brewster after it was seized by the Navy. And then a name you might know, Harry S. Truman, who was the chair of the Senate committee that investigated the shoddy work at Brewster. So we've got a lot to look at here. So here's the early history of Brewster Aeronautics. 1933, Brewster created its own aircraft designs to sell to the United States and its allies. Now, this particular case, now remember, they're designing their own aircraft designs. James Work's doing that. He's just doing it, pardon the expression, flying by the seat of his pants. In 1935, the Navy requests designs to replace the Grumman F-3F biplane. That was the state of the art in 1935 for naval aircraft. Now you can see if that's what you were going into World War II with, and that was a carrier-based plane there, that needed to be replaced. It wasn't going to work. So several things. Brewster first, 1934, designs its SBN-1 dive bomber. It's purchased by the Navy, and it's built by the Navy itself. They took Brewster's design and they built them down at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. But by 1941, it's completely obsolete. Then 1936, Brewster comes up with a monoplane that's designated the F-2A Buffalo. And the Navy puts a large order for this because they need airplanes for their carriers. But production's very, very slow. And that's due to the ineffective factories that Brewster has in New York and New Jersey. So they're not here in Pennsylvania yet. They're up in New York City. Now, I want to show you their factories. This is where they were building aircraft. They built their parts for their aircraft in two 7-story old-fashioned industrial buildings in Long Island City. So number 1 and number 2 are their factories. Now, these are the old kind of tough spots. I mean, these are the old standard kinds of factories. And because of the pillars and the limited heights of the floors, they could not assemble their aircraft there. So what they would do is they took all of the parts that they built there, then took them out on Long Island to Roosevelt Field, out a famous field from where Lindbergh took off, I believe, and they put them together there. So they assembled the planes out on Long Island at Roosevelt Field, and then later at an airfield in New Jersey. So that's how they were doing it. So it's really going to be slow because you've got so much inefficiency built into the system. Now, James Work hires these Miranda brothers as salesmen. They had been involved in fraud, spent 2 years in prison for selling illicit arms to Bolivia. Now they sold these aircraft. They sold the designs for the Buffalo and a new Buccaneer dive bomber to Finland, Belgium, England, and the Netherlands. They overpromised what Brewster could produce. So there is the Brewster Buccaneer, also called by the British the Bermuda. Now, remember, the war in Europe is underway by late 1930s. They sell planes to the Republican side of the Spanish Civil War through Turkey. That's how they do it. And they sold them to Japan. Now, the Miranda brothers took a 12.5% commission for every plane they sold. That meant they took 12.5% of the total cost of the aircraft, including packing, shipping, spare parts, and even they took 12.5% of the cost of the pilot's manual. This is highly unusual, as you could imagine. Now, these large orders required the company to seek larger facilities. Now, they approached the War Production Board, and the War Production Board does not want plants close to the coast. Now, I think that makes sense. They were worried in early parts of, as the wars are breaking out at the beginning of World War II, they're worried about submarines and being bombed from the ocean. So what happens? Well, turns out James Work happens to own an estate near Johnsville. He sold the land to a Brewster subsidiary, who in turn sold it to the government. So Work creates this place that the government will purchase the land. They purchase the land, and then the Defense Plant Corporation builds a $9 million plant and leases it to Brewster. Now, you folks are pretty much, I should tell you some other things about what's going on at this time. Some other things that Work did. He incorporated Work Engineering Incorporated. He was the only employee of this company, and he sold his services to his own company, Brewster Aeronautics. He was then a consultant for them for $11,000 a year for 3 years. So that adds on to the total cost of the production of the aircraft. So he does this while he's president of Brewster. This cost plus the overhead costs were passed on to the company. When the business expanded, Work bought another factory nearby under a name which is called Brayco, which is first 2 letters Brewster. It's really a Brewster name. Then he leased his own building to Brewster for $48,000 a year, adding to the cost of every aircraft. So there's a lot of funny money going on here in the background here. Now, where's this place? Well, look at that. Isn't that a surprise? This is circa 1943. On the left-hand side, you'll see the Brewster Factory, government owned. You probably recognize it. That's your Johnsville. And I think some of you saw after the Naval Air Development Center closed and they took the sign down off the front of the building, engraved in the pediment is the word Brewster. And on the right-hand side, the government bought that from the left-hand side, on the left-hand side of Jacksonville Road. That's right, that's the right name, Jacksonville Road. The left side of the government. The right side was part of, which is where the airfield was the Brewster Airfield, which James Work owned, and the government built the airfield on his land at the time. So we got a lot of things going on here. Now, so this is more a later picture, as you probably know it. Now, of course, where that airfield is nothing more. Mostly it's a shopping center and Ann's Choice. So that's where the location of this. I put this here for people who would not know that area particularly well. You folks know it well. Now, the rest of this story, I'm going to tell you, where did I find this information? Well, I'm going to share with you headlines from newspapers locally and nationally. And I'll post a headline and then tell you something about it. Most of the citations are from the Hatboro Public Spirit, which was a daily newspaper in those days. And so there's a lot of local stories and they report things. So let's get started on the tale. These stories come from two places, the Philadelphia Inquirer lots of times, and again, and Time Magazine. So you're going to find quite a bit of attention to this place. So the first couple headlines: speed up at the Brewster plant project after groundbreaking. So we're breaking ground in late 1941 at Johnsville. And the first unit of the new Brewster plant is ready by June 26th. And they're doing things like they had to build a sewer plant. The Navy's doing a lot here, spending a lot of money, government is, and keeping pace with this huge factory and so on, this type of thing. By late June, the first unit's operational. Production of planes starts in August 1941. The airfield's open, enough to have the landing field there at that point, August 1941. By the end of 1941, no plane is actually ever produced at Brewster. So there's a lot of nothing going on as far as production. Now, engine availability was a major factor in this, but many partially completed aircraft were cluttering the factory and the airfield. It looked like at that point in time, I read one spot said it looked like maybe one of the auto junkyard, with everything just spread out all over the place. Now, by May 1942, that's less than a year after they broke ground, the Navy production is so bad, the Navy moves in on Brewster and seizes the two plants, the one in Long Island City where it is doing the parts, and its big new final assembly plant in Johnsville, where it's supposed to be zipping out finished planes. In other words, nothing's happening. It's just crazy. Now, the White House said dissatisfaction with management, the Navy said in a controlled tone. I love the language here. The corporation holds contracts for combat type aircraft. The existing private control has not proved adequate. This is in Time Magazine, May 4th, 1942. So in less than a year, this place has got problems. From inside the plant comes accounts of the inadequacy. Here's what the FBI report said, that the FBI found several dozen saboteurs working for Brewster. There were big swastika-shaped holes were sometimes found punched in the plane's wings. Ooh. Now remember, at this point, we're in early here, that any attempt, when the company attempts to fire men the union intervenes. The union's very strong here. From the plants come rumors of confusion, inefficiency, mismanagement, and all sorts of things delaying. From the chairman of the board of Brewster comes silence. He doesn't say a thing. So here's another part of the Time article. Not long ago, Congressman Engel spoke against Zeltzer and the Miranda brothers. Alfred and Ignacio, merchants for bombs, grenades, and other lethal wares of war. Even in jail, the Mirandas arranged to handle sales for a company called the Hayes Manufacturing Company, an airplane parts company owned by Brewster. They got Hayes an order for parts from Brewster Aeronautics. Their commission was 5%. They're getting 5% for parts that a Brewster company is selling to a Brewster company. Out of jail, they handle the sales of the Buffalo fighters. They operate as Brewster Export Corporation, and then they charge 12% commission on the sale of everything they do overseas. They also own 10% of the stock of both Hayes and Brewster. We've got a very complicated organization here in terms of where money is being going. Now, after they took charge, under pressure from who knows where, the Navy returns control to Brewster. Now, the Johnstown factory has failed to deliver planes on time, and Brewster's going ahead and trying to fill the foreign orders first. Anything they do complete are going overseas and not doing them for the Navy. Here, well, this is causing some concern. Now, the stockholders in the company sued the company for their inflated commissions and their shady business practices. Now, if you held stock in this company, you would probably be a little upset. Now, Buccaneers, ordered in 1941, finally started to roll slowly off the line in July of 42. Now, the managers accused the workers of loafing, and union representatives accused the company of unfair hiring and firing. This is World War II. Remember, in World War II, no one's allowed to strike. The planes produced by Brewster were so bad that Navy flyers soon started nicknaming the F-2A-2 Buffalo the flying coffin. Well, turns out, I'll tell you some more about that later. So what happens? This is, I have to move something here, I can't see something here. This is in March 43, Henry J. Kaiser is brought in by the Navy to run Brewster. Now, Kaiser, remember, the Liberty ships were his company producing those. 2,500 Liberty ships, which really carried us through World War II until the submarine menace was taken care of. Henry J. Kaiser agrees to become chairman of Brewster for no money. This man was really dedicated to solving and helping win the war. And he brings Frederick Leibel in as his new CEO, and their goal is to increase production. Now, the company now has $275 million in unfilled orders. And the workforce at Johnsville is now 5,000 people. 5,000 people, and they're not producing anything. Well, then there's a strike at Brewster. Headline: strike stops plane output at Brewster. 3,000 protest the arrest of guards by the Navy. In spite of the no strike pledge, guards refused to take their assigned stations. They wanted to pick their duty stations based on seniority, not where they might be needed. Now, the guards were members of the United Auto Workers, but what they didn't know, but they were also in the Coast Guard Reserve. In order to get the job and to avoid the draft, they had to join the Coast Guard Reserve. And the union claimed that the action was not a strike, that they actually quit. Ooh, that's interesting. Well, they quit and they're in the military. So in support of them, 4,000 workers walk off the job in support of them. So we have a big strike here. Now, next headline, Hatboro Public Spirit, August 26th. 6 more guards are arrested in a spectacular roundup in Hatboro, and president of the company pleads for the workers to come back to work, and a movement, they asked for a cooling off period. Well, what happened to the arrested guards? Well, the arrested guards were taken to the brig in Philadelphia. You see, since they were in the Coast Guard, they could be taken to a military brig. The guards were immediately reclassified as 1A by their draft boards. Woohoo, we're playing a little bit hardball here. The strike was declared to be a violation of the Smith-Connolly Act, which violated the no strike clause for the duration of war. And the Senate took notice of the strike. And so the US Senate starts some hearings. What they do with the guards? They started court-martial proceedings on them. Since they're in the military and they quit, AWL or whatever. And Truman and his group starts a probe. Truman, Walgren from Washington, Kilgore from West Virginia, Ball, these are names that would be big in the time. They investigated the management-employee relationship as well as the slow production. The court-martial trial was conducted at the Navy Yard. Now, the guards, in their defense, claimed they did not know that they gave up their union protections when they entered the Coast Guard reserves. Well, I don't know if that worked as much of a defense, but so the case is then taken before the War Labor Board, because what happened was that the company had cited the failure of the employees to work on Labor Day. You see what happened, everybody's supposed to work that day. Both Rubillo and Kaiser were brought before the Labor Board and asked why less than 5% of the employees worked on the Labor Day in spite of notices and President Roosevelt's plea that everyone work on Labor Day in 1943 because of the need to get aircraft to our fighting men. Again, the production at the plant is well below expectations. The question becomes, what are they doing there? The union, by the way, unofficially told the employees they would be paid even if they didn't report to work. So we've got all kinds of mixed messages going out in battle between what's going on. Now, the Truman Committee holds some hearings in mid-September. And testimony is taken from a reporter for the Philadelphia Record, then as big a newspaper in Philadelphia as the Inquirer or the Bulletin. And he works at Johnsville for 13 days undercover. And this is what he testifies. I think you're going to find this interesting. He testifies, the actual work being done there could be done in about a quarter of the time they're taking to do it. Employees are instructed to loaf on the job by their union supervisors. Parts and tools are deliberately handled slowly and mishandled to waste, handed out slowly and given to waste time, if you will. That's an interesting situation there. I'm trying to move something, I apologize. Employees took naps, gambled, and congregated in restrooms. Despite inefficiencies, no one was ever laid off, and even more people are hired. It seems that the word was out in the area that if you wanted to avoid being drafted, get a job at Brewster. You wouldn't have to do anything, and who knows what was going on to get these jobs. Everyone worked overtime. They're not producing anything, but there was plenty of overtime. Only one bomber came off the end of the line in 13 days that the man worked there. they're supposed to be producing them lickety-split. And here's what the punchline was. Loafing is the principal occupation at the Bucks County Playhouse. Well, I know you probably heard of the Bucks County Playhouse, but its first name, it got transferred to Brewster Aircraft there at Johnsville. Now, this was interesting. The company itself had a newsletter. In 1943, this comes from the Brewster Builder Company newsletter.
Consulted.
This letter is purportedly from a Brewster employee who had written back to a plant worker. And I want you to read this because it's from someone who worked there, and both here and in Long Island. I'm here on Guadalcanal, he wrote. It's a little different here to what I remember working on the second floor, referring to Long Island. Remember how we used to hang out between the toilet and the first aid? Well, we sure wasted many hours, and Jim, many the hour I regretted this. Private Smith, who identified himself as reportedly wounded, said of the 47 of his Marine buddies were killed because of lack of bomber support. Jimmy continues, let me tell you, if I was on that second floor now, I'd shoot every loafer that would hang around the toilets or that didn't work. The 47 we lost were better than 10,000 of the wise guys that go into Brewster's and do nothing but spill rumors and draw their pay. Boy, what a lesson I've learned. If I were discharged, I'd go back to Brewster's and work again on the production, and will consider it my life's work. If I could only make the gang believe that the work and then more work is needed every hour and day and night so we can lick our enemies. Jim, I'm never much on preaching, but damn it, can't those guys ever get smart and see what we're all in a tight pinch? You know, every minute counts. Well, this thing goes on, and thanks to Bill Pileggi, he gave me this article, and I think it's really telling about the attitudes which was going on in the company. So the Truman Committee comes back with some recommendations, and it gives them some time to clean house. Well, this is the nature of World War II. We're trying to get things done. So finger pointing goes on between the Union, the management, and the Navy. The committee gave Brewster until December to iron out its problems. The committee suggested that dive bomber work be abandoned and it would be shifted solely to fighter construction. The whole idea was maybe their problem is they're trying to make too many different aircraft. Kaiser should take over the day-to-day management and transfer his most capable men to Johnsville. In other words, forget the ships, forget what you're doing in making your shipyards producing the Liberty ships. Get here and try to help these people do this one job. Well, September 1943, bomber contract is dropped, and they're now going to help them make fighters only. Layoff commences at the Long Island plant. They're saying, okay, the problem up there is so bad, let's try to do it at Johnsville. And the order separates agreement to say the guards are no longer part of the Union. At this point, the British cancel their contract for Buccaneers, and the layoffs are by seniority only. Okay. The War Labor Board directs that a new contract be executed. Guards were put in a separate bargaining unit under the control of the Navy and not the Coast Guard. So that was playing hardball. And the UAW moves to reinstate the 4 court-martialed guards. So they're trying to still go back to their old technique. So here's what happens. The Navy immediately cancels its contract for the Brewster Buffalo, the Flying Coffin, and the Buccaneer. These planes, I'll tell you a little bit more about why they did that. And they switched Johnsville to production of a different aircraft that is subcontracted from the Curtiss Wright or Curtiss Voigt Corporation, the Corsair. Now, any of you who are fans of World War II and history of World War II know the Corsair well. That's that little gull wing plane on the right, and with the folding wings up for the aircraft, featured in many movies, and there was a TV show with those, a wonderful aircraft made by Curtiss. But the Navy's got this plant here, and it has to get something out of it, so they tell Brewster to make them. So the parts are coming in to do that. They're really to assemble these planes. Here's what happens at Johnsville. They actually built, by the end of 1944, 735 of these Corsairs. But the quality remained a problem, and the number was actually less than half what the Navy ordered from Brewster. So the quality became pretty bad. And let me tell you a little bit about the quality in this particular case. I'll tell you a little bit, I'll tell it now rather than later. The planes were so bad here that when they were finished, management created a device to pick up a Corsair by its tail, lift it in the air, and shake it so that all the loose bolts would fall out. Pretty bad. The Navy never used one of the Corsairs built at Johnsville in combat. They used them to tow targets and things of that nature. They would not put them in the Pacific or into a war zone. That's pretty damning. October 1943, the House of Representatives decides to have an inquiry. Now, this Naval Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives described the production of the planes at Brewster as deplorable. The chairman, a name you probably heard later in my youth, I heard the name Carl Vinson, congressman. Brewster has failed to deliver airplanes in anything like the quantity that it should. Rubillo, who's the president in charge here, makes no comment. The United Auto Worker president, Di Lorenzo, places the blame on the Navy and Kaiser, not on him. On anything they're doing. Receipts from Brewster, Henry J. Kaiser assumes personal control, and under the investigation scheduled to appear before the committee, we have Kaiser, Rubillo, Di Lorenzo, and a name you probably remember, Navy Undersecretary James Forrestal, and that reporter Frank Long, who testified before. Now the UAW must prove that they will abide by their no strike clause and not use union disciplinary machinery to interfere with management's efforts to increase production. So here they're being told this is a war, trying to get this done. Now, Brewster employees pledged Kaiser that they're going to give him their complete support. And we're going to planes should be turned out at 100 planes a week. Remember earlier, we got one plane off in 13 days. Kaiser's son is brought in to be his chief assistant. Forrestal says in a congressional report, the company's labor troubles have been chronic for a long time. The contract with labor is very restrictive. It prevents discharge or disciplining of any employee without prior consent of the union. No one can be transferred from one job to another without his personal approval. His personal approval is the union president. A Navy spokesman in front of this committee says, management has traded away its rights in order to keep wages down. Maybe they could keep wages down because people were actually trying to work here in order to avoid being drafted. Now, that's not a story we hear about World War II, but that's life. DiLorenzo is really strong and sometimes drunk with power. Workers follow the union directives. DiLorenzo says, no bad union ever was created by anything other than bad management. We're bad because they're bad. I love it. The committee urges labor management and Navy to cooperate. This is just incredible to me. And so the whole thing, the committee is told that supervisors order this is what I told you earlier. Supervisors order engineers to build a giant device to flip finished planes and shake out the loose nuts and bolts. This is really a classic case. I couldn't avoid putting this particular picture here. You know, another way of saying what a snafu is. Brewster Aircraft was situation normal, all fouled up. And you know it in another language, and I'm not going there. So criminal action is hinted. This is the public spirit. Again, October 43. The former president testifies that production rose under his direction. Yeah, from one every 13 days to one every 2 weeks. I mean, every one a week, I guess. And a survey finds that many of the employees are friendly to Germany. This is where the sabotage was occurring. There was a good deal of sabotage within the plant. Now, the House Committee implies that the Department of Justice and the FBI are now investigating. And again, Rubillo said that his production went up 20% under his leadership, but 20% of low is low. The Navy rep testified that one manager and 6 employees were removed because of their subversive activities. A union official is accused of instructing employees to resist the military police if they enter the building. So this really is, I was just appalled when I discovered these things. Now, this is what's in the newspaper. So I don't know what goes on there. The committee also hears of reports of loafing Johnfield workers. They're making shovels, andirons, fire screens, lunchboxes, and other items for themselves in the plant on the company's time and with the company's materials. Okay, well, that's really a serious workforce. Engineering employees are stealing technical books and other materials. Rubillo blamed all of Brewster's troubles on the hellish auto workers contract. He condemned the union's Tom DiLorenzo and denounced the local as a gang of 40 thieves. I love his quote. This is Time magazine. He stated, Rubillo says, every time I go to bed with Tom DiLorenzo, I got out with less than I went in with. He said Brewster was trying to build planes without having complete drawings or a list of the needed materials. My goodness, would you want to fly in one of these airplanes? Forrestal says, if Kaiser fails, all Brewster contracts should be transferred to other companies. I know now exasperation is coming in. Now, DiLorenzo faces a probe by his own union. And so he comes in front of the committee. At this point in time, some of the bombers that were badly needed, some of the partially completed bombers that were out there, they just collected them all and burned them and took them to the scrap heap to boil down whatever was there to try to make new metal to do whatever. So all of this is wasted, partially completed planes, hundreds of them. Before the committee, DiLorenzo admits he's used aliases and made false statements on documents and his employment application at Brewster. Again, 300 partially completed planes go to the scrap heap. When the company asked DiLorenzo about his aliases, his arrest records, job application, he proudly says, now listen to this quote, he says in front of a United States committee of the House of Representatives, I would lie at all times in order to get a job and support myself. In comments to the Washington Post, he states, if I had brothers on the front line who needed the 10 or 12 airplanes that were sacrificed in the strike, I'd let them die if necessary to preserve our way of life or rights or whatever you want to call it. Now there's a true American dedicated to making sure that the plant works. Can you imagine a statement like that? Well, now you see why I'm saying it's an outlier to the American's greatest generation. The assistant plant manager testifies that there's sabotage on the finished planes, cut cables, frayed wires. Stolen tools and materials are taken all the time. Compasses, clocks, electric drills. Outside women are entering the plant at night for trysts. That is, we're running a little side business there, a little house of ill repute within the factory. Union control the workplace and their protection of protect non-performing workers. The guards just really are sometimes not where they're supposed to be. They're not guarding anything. People can come and go out of this plant anytime they want, taking anything they want. And he testifies that the plant is overstaffed by 50%. FBI does some investigation and they find fake time cards and kickbacks on purchasing. Well, these headlines soar as the hearings continue for 3 months. All kinds of things going on here. There's laying off people now. The change over to freighter workers now. Work or else is urged. The three-way blame games go on. Sharp questioning of the final thing. So whatever happened to these, well, I mentioned this earlier, most of them were used only for training and were launched. Oh, the other thing I found interesting, when they wanted to test the catapults on the carrier, they took some of Brewster's planes and launched them off into the ocean with the motors not even running, just to see what happened, to make sure that the launchers worked. The company House Committee also says it favored cancellation immediately of anything going to Brewster. That excessive and duplicated salaries of executives should be examined. That's part of the thing about the double dipping and all the rest of that. We're charging twice for things. That wages paid to shop stewards when not working on production would not be allowed as part of the cost of the plane. They were even throwing in the price of the union's workers into the cost of production. That the selective service investigate deferments of workers with a view of determining whether their work is truly essential to the war effort. And in the event of another strike, all contracts be canceled in Johnsville and its equipment be reclaimed by the Defense Plant Corporation. So things are pretty bad. Kaiser confirms the report that he's quitting. He's not going to do this. He's got better things to do. He leaves. The future of Brewster now hinges on the Navy action and the May election of the union. So guess who's running again for union office? Again, we're going to see the same names. So what happens? Do the workers learn anything? Well, let's see. Uncertain future. Work now gets control of Brewster again in return for voting for a voting privilege in the company by the Navy. So he has to give some people on the board of directors over to them. The Navy just wants this to move. They're trying to get out of Congress's view screen. The Navy gave three at the end of, but in July of that year, all work is thrown out. The Navy canceled for 3 reasons. Brewster had 12,500 employees, and yet it was the smallest in producing of the 3 major Corsair contractors. They had more workers and producing less. Brewster had no additional Navy Department contracts or prospects of any, and no other work's going to go of the importance of the war effort's going to go to them. In other words, we're not going to use them again. And Brewster had a higher per unit cost to produce each of the other its Corsairs than the other 2 manufacturers, which were turning out the ones that were used. So it's just it was a nightmare. So what happens at this? When the cancellation comes on, the workers protest. They have a 2-day stay-in. They pretend to work during the daytime, and then they sleep in Brewster plants at night. And FDR then, in order to embarrassment of this, I guess, asked for new work for Brewster plants. Well, he doesn't know what's going on. So the president's just trying to keep things and the war effort up and morale up, I guess. So what happens? June 1944, the Navy takes over the Brewster plant and it seeks to acquire the airport. Remember, the airport doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to James Work and the Brewster Company. And Brewster is supposed to finish the planes that are currently underway, but Johnsville now will be operated as a branch of the Materiel Center at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. So this is where and why Johnsville became part of the Navy. And that's why Johnsville, the Naval Air Development Center, was a Navy facility after the war. Long and short, that's how Johnsville got to be Johnsville, I guess. Now, Brewster management negotiates with the Navy to settle disputes over the past payment and expenses. Of course, Brewster now reports to its shareholders a large loss in October 1944, and management shuts down the company. The war ends, and in 1946, Brewster Aeronautical Corporation was dissolved by its shareholders and their stock, of course, was absolutely worthless. So what happens? Di Lorenzo is finally taken to court. He's given a month in prison and $500 fine because he lied on his statements, and that's where they got him. So he again went to jail. So let's do some postscripts. What happened to James Work? Well, interestingly enough for me, James Work, by the way, his education was at the National Agricultural School in Doylestown. So he was trained to be a farmer. He then became the president of the National Agricultural School in Doylestown. National Agricultural School in Doylestown? Yes. Later became the National Agricultural College, National Aggies, then Delaware Valley College, and now Delaware Valley University. So he became the president of that. He served in that role from 1946 to 1974, and then chancellor for that. So he built Del Val College and was behind that. That's where he went after the war. And of course, the Johnsville plant became the Naval Air Warfare Center, and then eventually the Naval Air Development Center. And you're all familiar with that plaque that sits there on the street road, where it had a distinguished record of high quality research in the development facility, and quite a difference from the Brewster Corporation. People were happy to cover that pennant that said Brewster with the Naval Air Development Center and the other signs that were there. Quite a difference. So with that, I'll open to questions, comments. I'll stop sharing, and Eleanor, back to you. I hope that all worked. I have no idea what came through.
Oh, no, it all came through. So thank you so
Okay.
much.
Let me
Yeah.
try to stop my share.
All right. Great. So we can open it up for questions.
Yeah.
My head's spinning after hearing the whole story. I mean, it seems like literally from the inception of this company, it was a complete cluster. And I am really curious. I don't know if you've ever seen or have any idea how much money was wasted over the
Oh.
duration of the war with this company and all of its corruption.
Well, but remember, as the war is going on, there's a lot. I mean, people are just concentrating, trying to move things. So I guess people can fly under the radar. Well, he didn't fly under the radar, but it took a long time, and a lot of money was gleaned out of there and taken. And remember, that building cost $9 million to build, and it was built in a very short period of time. And the airfield was built in a short period of time. So it's incredible what was done, but it wasn't done by Brewster. It was done by naval contracts with other local companies.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, one of the questions that always comes up at this point in time was at the same time, the Warminster Heights or Lacey Park was not built until much later. None of the workers that worked at Brewster lived in Lacey Park. That was completed as the war went on. It was much later, so it didn't occur. That came later in the picture, as well as Fulmer Heights were all built as housing for people around the for the defense industries that came into Hatboro, because there were other industries along Jacksonville Road and some of the things where the VIX plant and so forth. All of those were originally built for companies that were doing defense contracts.
Right.
Oh, by the way, it was not unusual for companies to be building other companies' designs. My father worked during the war for Baldwin Locomotive Company. Well, there's not a big call for locomotives, but Baldwin was making along the river down above Chester and Eddystone, they were making Sherman tanks.
Oh,
So my father worked at the Army tank shop building Sherman tanks.
Wow.
He was 38, 39 at the time. So, and he's a welder. So and he said they worked hard there, because they were really, the company was really trying to produce tanks as fast as they could.
yeah. Interesting question. You said that a lot of your research was, from researching the local newspapers.
Mhm.
But I'm assuming that some of the research and putting this together came from other sources.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious about, how, what that mix of information was.
Well, remember, I'm telling you, this is I'm being a storyteller here more than a researcher. So I was gleaning a lot from local newspapers, and not online either. I had to go through microfiche to get most of it. And then other types of things were just going back and trying to find things about the Brewster Company, and then some bits of the Congressional Record, trying to dig into that, try to get some more detail of that. But there was so much in the testimonies, it's hard to boil down for a short period of time. So,
Yeah.
and plus the other thing, I didn't think anyone would have any interest in this topic. I just did it because I was interested in the Corsair, to be honest with you. I just thought that was one of the greatest aircraft in World War II. It served so well. And so when I heard that they were produced locally as a kid, I thought I was very proud until I found out.
Oh man. Now you also mentioned about recently coming across FBI records associated with Brewster. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Well, one of your members provided me, and I'm going blank right now. I'm having a tough week. A huge file from the federal government under the Freedom of Information Act. And so I was plowing through them, but these are the kind of things that much of them were FBI reports of investigations of what people were supposed to be investigating there. And they were just writing things down. We heard that none of it would hold up in court, is what I'm saying. So there was nothing there that I could say, this for sure happened. The comments that I did make that said these was what went on in the plant were in the Congressional Record. I used that. Whether or not they were ever validated or not is another issue entirely.
Yeah.
The toughest thing about this talk, by the way, is I can remember the first time I gave it, and there were people whose family members worked there. And they came very proud, and they were pretty mad at me. But you tell them what you find, right?
Yeah.
That
Wow.
doesn't mean every person at the plant was that way, but there's a culture that's set, and the culture was toxic.
Yeah.
It was pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard for those who worked at the Naval Air Development Center to believe that kind of environment could have preceded them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, you know why the two air bases are so close. The other air base, Willow Grove, was actually Pitcairn Aircraft.
Right.
who made autogyros and so forth. And the Navy basically took that from Pitcairn in order so they could fly submarine patrols along the coast, which they did forever. I remember the Neptunes flying out of there for many years. And so they had a different mission, so they could be that close to each other. Of course, Willow Grove became obsolete when the satellites came along.
Yeah.
You don't need the aircraft. I understand from talking to people who flew the Neptunes that they flew at about 117 miles an hour, very slowly, and rattled like crazy. So they were flying for 12 hours like this constantly. So,
My.
not a great duty.
No, no. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, Eleanor, it's Dan. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Jim, you answered my first question. I thought Lacey Park was built for the workers at Brewster and later Warminster. But
I think what happened, the timing was such that it was later on. It was a little later, and I don't think it was fully occupied by completed by the end of the war.
okay, yeah, there's 12,500 employees moving in and out of that plant every day. And the roads were, I'm sure, not like they were now. Bucks County was pretty rural. Did you run across any information about, was there some kind of transportation center, buses, trains?
Well, one of the great reasons for that would have been the train did come up to Hatboro, and then people could get from there up. And then a lot of people who were the local area, by the way, this is one of the other things I didn't want to mention, but the people in the area who were here before the war did not look kindly on all of the people who were coming in from the coal regions and from Philadelphia and so forth. You know, that sort of caused a little disequilibrium to those who were here.
And did
So there was
those
conflicts of
did
that
those
nature.
workers eventually build houses in the area to stay here to work? Do you know?
Well, yes, actually, there's, for me, one of the interesting other story I found recently, many of you probably don't know that in 1910, along York Road between County Line and Street Road, they actually got quite a long way in building a speedway to compete with Indianapolis Speedway. We almost had a 2-mile racetrack there. World War II, World War I started, and that fell apart. But that area, which is called the Speedway section of Warminster, in those days, people just bought little lots. So lots of people built little, the right word is shacks during World War II, and did that until they later, after there were no roads and things of that nature, they just built up shanty towns and then eventually got rebuilt over time. So there's a whole story there about what happened to the land nearby. So people were building temporary housing, if you will, to get near the work. And I think part of the thing, since the war industry, that people could get gas ration cards to get out here. So some old cars, and I'm sure people brought them out by bus and all the rest of that.
My second question is, was James' work paid for his airfield by the Navy, or did they just take it like they did with Willow Grove and Pitcairn?
I suspect they just took it. I don't know that. I know that Pitcairn had to sue the Navy, the federal government, for stealing his patents that they gave to Sikorsky for his autogyro blades. And it took him 25 years or 25 years to get a settlement of $19 million from the government. So I don't know that Work did that to get money for his airfield, or he settled for it. I don't know that detail.
Okay, thank you. Enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
Anyone else
Could
with
you-
questions?
Could you say a few words about the workforce? You know, Italians, Asians, you know, were there any African Americans, you know, anything about like that sort of thing?
Well, I do know the following. A number of them were folks who were of German descent and very, very sympathetic. That's where the sabotage was coming from. I think you probably had a mixture of folks. I couldn't get any real detail. I think it was a matter of mostly people telling each other, come to work. My brother helps you, so forth, people coming down from the coal regions and so forth. There was a shortage of workers everywhere. So I really don't know. I couldn't find anything that described that. Sorry, I can't answer a better question on that.
What do you, what's your next presentation or your next area of history, local history that you're delving into?
Well, what interests me is of no interest to most people. For example, I found this little story that I like to tell about a golf pro at Huntington Valley Country Club in the middle of World War II, who was accused of being a Japanese spy.
Huh.
And it's a nice, interesting story. There's no truth to it, but somebody really trying to set him up. But he was a trick shot artist that traveled the world doing trick shots. He actually, as he did, he traveled with Walter Hagen, famous golfer. And he would give, during the 40s, when if you won the US Open, you might make $1,000 for a prize, or 1,500 was the first prize for winning.
Mm-hmm.
And he would give golf trick shot exhibitions with Walter Hagen along, and he would get $500 an exhibition doing trick shots. It's quite a thing. So he actually did this in front of Hirohito, gave Hirohito golf lessons and Tojo golf lessons. And a propaganda film was made with his trick shots, and so it caused all kinds of trouble.
Oh boy.
And so it's an interesting story to me. And his son, by the way, was also a golfer, became a Hollywood movie star and starred as Joe Palooka.
Oh, wow.
Who cares, right? Who cares?
No, I love these.
But that one I could find clips and everything. It's amazing what you can find on me.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. And we have a question that came in from chat from Mark. Were any Brewsters built at the Pitcairn plant? And he
No,
says that
nothing, no.
No, nothing. Okay.
Because once the Navy took over that plant, by then Pitcairn Aircraft, which Pitcairn built a little plane called the Mail Wing, which was the start of Eastern Airlines and the start of mail service. That was well before, and the autogyro never really sold well. So when they took it over, they just immediately started doing reconnaissance along the coast for submarines. And the reason they wanted it was far enough inland that it wouldn't get bombed.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Mark also says he works at Tinius Olson over there, by the old Willow Grove station, and he says
that was Pitcairn's original building.
Yeah, and he says on the wall in the office is a picture of Brewster planes being built in what looks like their plant. So that's what prompted the question.
Oh, maybe. I just don't know that.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. They could have brought them over. No, they didn't need the airfield.
No. All right. Any other questions? All right. Okay, well, I'm going to take that as a no, but Jim, this was fabulous. Just as I enjoyed it the first time, I enjoyed it again the second time. And
well, I hope it had no, it changes all the time. I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, it is exactly as you say, that it's remarkable that, I almost feel like NEDC emerged from the ashes of.
That's exactly right. That's a good comment. Yes, I agree.
Emerged from that, but really, really certainly distinguished himself over its subsequent 50-year career in Warminster, or 50-year time span. So,
well, I think you'll agree that covering their name was a good move.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we can call it an evening. Thanks again, Jim. This
Thank
was a
you.
great presentation, and hope everyone is back in April. We actually have David Stumpf, who we've heard a couple of times last year, and he's coming back to talk about the Regulus missile in April. So please join us for that. And actually, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you
Good night.
all. Good
Thank
night.
you.